That was The Other Side of the Mountain. And the story of this remarkable young woman first came to the attention of producer Edward S. Feldman, the senior vice president in charge of motion pictures for Filmways, when he read a pictorial essay about it in the September 2nd issue of Life magazine back in 1972. He then observed her as a teacher at the Hawthorne Elementary School in Beverly Hills, where his children were students, and ultimately he met with Jill and negotiated for the rights to her story and brought the project to Universal. The Other Side of the Mountain 2 will be seen tomorrow afternoon at 3 o'clock, and as I indicated to you earlier, we are also going to have a very special guest, MARILYN HASSETT herself. She will tell us about shooting the film, getting to know, I'm sure, Miss Kinmont personally, and what she and Miss Kinmont are doing at the moment. That sequel co-stars MARILYN with Timothy Bottoms, with Nan Martin once again playing her mother, and Belinda Montgomery back as Audra Jo. So we hope you will be back as well. The Other Side of the Mountain 2, again directed by Larry Pierce, 3 o'clock tomorrow. Happy Sunday afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our show. And as promised, a very special guest. You've been enjoying this lady's work earlier this weekend, if you've been watching the Family Film Festival. So it's my great pleasure to present in the sequel to The Other Side of the Mountain, the star of both films, Miss MARILYN HASSETT. Welcome.
Thanks, Tom.
What a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you.
May I just be totally honest and say I think the picture that we saw yesterday and this morning, you were just wonderful.
Thank you.
And I don't know an actress who doesn't like to hear that, but on the other hand, I would be remiss if I didn't say it.
It was a wonderful role.
Not only a wonderful role, but a wonderful break and a wonderful... There are so many things to ask about, not only the movie that we saw, but the one we're about to see, the other part 2, that I guess I'm just going to start at the beginning, because we know about Jill Kinmont's beginnings. What about MARILYN HASSETT's beginnings? You're a local girl, I understand.
You know this is true.
Would you tell everybody where you're from and where you learned to act, etc.?
Well, I was born in Los Angeles, right here. I went to school in high school, Immaculate Heart in Hollywood, and Cal State Fulton, where I was going into the Peace Corps, but I was very shy, and it was recommended that I go into a drama class immediately.
Uh-huh.
And the drama class, the only way I could get through was becoming the ham of the class. And make a long story short, became more attractive to make people laugh than go over and plant seeds. I kind of fantasized what would have happened if I had gone into the Peace Corps, but this was the route I took.
And the getting of this marvelous part, in fact, for both of these pictures and subsequent pictures that followed, we'll really talk about when we get into the movie. But I have to ask you, do you find that overnight fame, which indeed it brought you, and you were very young, was it difficult to handle?
Well, that's to say the least. It was. It was more than I was prepared for. And instead of, well, cashing in and showing up for all the Hollywood agendas, I pretty much withdrew. And now I'm excited to be coming back.
Good.
It took me a long time.
Well, I've got to tell you, I must confess, and I always tell the truth on this show, I had not seen the movies until they were assigned to me for our program. And I was naturally looking forward because the director, Larry Pierce, is a friend of mine and a good friend of yours, which we'll talk about. But I had no idea they were just so gripping. And, of course, I guess Universal didn't know what they had on their hands either.
Not at all. They didn't do anything to promote the film, as a matter of fact, and then it became the sleeper that it was.
1975, right?
That's right.
Uh-huh.
And became one of their biggest money-making films of that day. So it took everyone by surprise.
All right. Well, then naturally you can't have a hit this large without deciding to do a sequel and bringing back the star. And in this one, you recall, if you saw earlier this weekend, Beau Bridges was the male star. This time it is Timothy Bottoms. Once again, Nan Martin, a fine actress, plays Jill Kinmont's mother, who is still living. And, well, let's get into it. Here is, as you will see, the continuation of a true story, The Other Side of the Mountain, Part 2. Where she and her mother, beautifully played by Nan Martin, are vacationing. Jill Kinmont is our guest, MARILYN HASSETT. The fact that Timothy Bottom's character just happens to have this lovely little inn where the ladies wind up staying, is that true? I guess most of the stuff is really true, right?
Yes, and that's thanks to Ed Feldman, the producer. He didn't want to embellish anything or add Hollywood to it, nor did he have to. If anything, we had to keep it down so they didn't get more sentimental than the story actually was.
Now, working with a real live character, of course, I presume she and her family were around a lot?
Yes, actually, they were a great help, and technical advisors couldn't have come any better. Her brother was there with me every inch of the way, as well as Jill. So as long as I knew that I was in the 50s, in which it would be hard to remember, so the skiing technique, along with the medical technique and the things that she was limited, and
oh, I never thought of
how
that.
she used the few muscles that were left, all of that technical work was closely monitored by Jill and her brother.
And I am always surprised when I realize that the actual accident occurred in the 50s. The movie was not made till 20 years later. Nowadays, if somebody has something of a very famous nature happen to him or her, instantly there's a picture on HBO next week.
That's right.
Yeah. Now, having Jill around, was that intimidating, or, as you say, it was helpful, but were there any suggestions specifically that she made that she wished some things you did or didn't do that you would do differently?
It's funny you should mention that. It was terrific. It was a bit intimidating because she's an extraordinary woman and so strong, and I was so new to doing a film, to Hollywood,
Right.
and attempting to portray this extraordinarily strong woman. But she was quite helpful. One day she did come up in her wheelchair and say, no, you've got to stop, cut. And the director said, what's wrong, Jill? What's wrong? She said, I never rolled my jeans like that. And we were like, whoa. All right.
That's wonderful. You mentioned the director, Larry Pierce, of course, and as I mentioned earlier when we were showing The Other Side of the Mountain 1, Larry got his very start right at this channel. And I understand that you, when you came in for the interview today, said, this looks familiar. You got your start here, too?
Yes, I was around 17, and I came into makeup, and I saw a rather more mature actress, let's say in her 20s, and she'd been up all night partying, and she said to the makeup artist, I need about 8 hours, Bob. And I went, what does that mean? And she left feeling wonderful, and she said, I just got 8 hours. And I went, so I got in the makeup chair, and I said, oh, I only need 5. And he said, 5 what, kid? Give me 5 hours.
Well, I've got to tell you, this being as good a time as any, the years have been absolutely marvelous to you because, let's face it, these pictures were made in 75 and 77, and here we are in lovely 91, and you are just looking splendid. You take good care of yourself, obviously.
Yes, well, I really like being active and staying, well, fit. It's real important for me, and I think in this town, if you don't, you go nuts. If you're not working. So it's my lithium working. I spend my lithium.
All right, we'll talk about your other working, and the working of 1977's The Other Side of the Mountain Part 2 will now proceed. We're back to Bishop, California, and let's go back to the film, and then we'll be back with our guest, MARILYN HASSETT. The sequel to the movie that was so popular for Universal in 1975. This is 1977's The Other Side of the Mountain Part 2 with our very special guest, MARILYN HASSETT. You were in Fullerton. You went to Cal State Fullerton, but how did this particular picture come into your career?
Well, that was several years later, and
you had done modeling, right? I mean,
done modeling.
commercial.
I'd been studying acting and paying for my acting lessons with doing commercials, yes. And I was lucky to get called in for an interview, along with so many other girls. And I believe it was 200 or 300 girls they saw between New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. And when they called me back to test, I didn't really believe it at all. And the story goes from Larry Pierce that the other ladies tended to go with the emotion of the scene on their tests. And I fought it all along, the entire screen test. I didn't want to cry. And the director kept probing me and hitting me with facts and trying to break me down. And towards the end, just a bit of a tear came out, and he wanted to see that strength, as it turned out. And I was afraid to break down and holding it in, as I have my own fears or passions, and it worked for the character, and the rest of history.
It indeed worked for the character in both films for different reasons, but that's the wonderful part. And I will tell you that I am surprised and delighted because after you see a movie that is so successful, and then the sequel. There are many other ways to show Jill Kinmont maturing and suffering, if that is the word. Of course, we all suffer in our own way, but you don't repeat yourself. And I think for a young actress with such little experience, that was quite amazing.
Thank you.
You credit Larry, your director, Larry Pierce, with that?
Absolutely. He helped so much. And then my own struggle with my own difficulties in life helped a lot because I'd kept a lot inside, and I think the human spirit, struggle of human spirit, was something I learned as a kid, and Larry helped me put it into the role.
Now, you and Larry were, as many of our friends out there know, married for a while and are divorced, but that would have caused some difficulties too, I imagine, because you did a couple of other pictures with him, The Bell Jar and the movie about the Super Bowl, whose title escapes me at the moment, 2 Minute Warning. I mean, what sort of emotions do you have about having worked with one person for so long? Do you think that, in a way, deterred your career, possibly?
Well, if I hadn't shied away from my career and having become so successful, I pretty much hid in the security of the relationship with my husband and believed that we would continue to work together. And unfortunately, the marriage didn't work out, and it was a rough Hollywood divorce, and it took me a long time to get back on my feet. But I'm a lot stronger from it.
All right. Now, we're going to find out what is going on with Marilyn Hassett in 1991, but not until we find out what happens with Jill Kinmont in these next scenes from this marvelous sequel to The Other Side of the Mountain, Part 2, coming up right now. Movie The Other Side of the Mountain, Part 2, and the star, of course, playing Jill Kinmont is Marilyn Hassett. Now, having played Marilyn this part twice, and then moving on to other roles, I find that I'm kind of surprised that you're not, very much more busy before the cameras these days. What's going on with Marilyn Hassett 1991?
Oh, yes. Well, I'm surprised too, but not really in this business. You never know what's going to happen from day to day. And coming back into the business, because I did take some time off, I'm actually looking at producing more and bringing projects of artist friends of mine, writers in particularly, that aren't well known and have written some wonderful scripts, and trying to package them with the people that I've met along the way. And hopefully we'll find some wonderful script that I can finance for myself or raise finances for, which is tough, especially when you've taken as much time off as I have.
Is there if a stage producer should be thinking about producing a certain play, and I know your film is practically your basic medium, but would you like to do a play? In other words, is there a Blanche Dubois that you have been eagerly to get at?
I don't want to go do any more Blanches in my life.
No more Blanches, okay.
But actually, in my late 20s, I got very involved with studying stage, finally. And it was a whole new arena, opened up a whole new world, and now I know what everyone's talking about. Wonderful gratification, immediate response from the audience, and a lot of fun. And I'm now hoping, actually, to have financing for a play I'll be doing next year.
We'll be looking for that, I assure you. Okay, we're going to leave a little time for the end to bring you as much of an update to Jill Kinmont's 1991 story as we can. Unfortunately, it's fairly sparse because we don't have a lot of information. However, we want you to find out how the movie ends before we tell what's happening now anyway. So here is the final portion of The Other Side of the Mountain, Part 2. Well, that was The Other Side of the Mountain, Part 2. And Marilyn, I can't thank you enough for coming down and sitting in our guest chair and looking so gorgeous at the same time.
It's wonderful to be back.
I must tell you, we've not been able to find any specific information about Jill Kinmont. She did obviously marry the character played in the movie. Her mother is still living in Bishop. I've tried to reach her, unfortunately. Have you talked to her at all recently?
I'm sorry to say I haven't, but I believe she's still living up in Bishop. The rumor has it that she's training in a nice elite club with a sports trainer. So we don't know.
Well, if there is somebody who would like us to know, and I guess that admits a little something on my part that I have not done my homework. I've done it as well as I can, honestly.
I would love to know.
We both would love to know. Thank you very much, everybody, and thank you, Marilyn, very much. Good luck to you and to all of us, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye, everybody.